Thank you all for coming tonight. It's wonderful to see such a great crowd. I'm Andrew Fairley, the Deputy Chair of the Mornington Peninsula Foundation, and I have the privilege of introducing Mark Scott to you this evening. Let me commence by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country that we are on, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay our respects to their elders past and present, and to also on your behalf celebrate their continuing connection to country and culture. On behalf of the Chair of the Mornington Peninsula Foundation, Ian Hicks, AO, and our board, I want to welcome you to this inaugural MPF Trobe University Oration. The MPF is really honoured to be partnering with Trobe University in the creation of an annual event that's created to highlight the innovation and initiative from Trobe University in areas of science and of the humanities. Many of you would know that Trobe University has a reputation for world-class research and practices in a number of different disciplines, which include health, education, well-being, commerce and technology. And this annual oration, the first of which we're having this evening, provides an opportunity for a greater understanding and an application of innovation to the Mornington Peninsula organisations and communities. And particularly relevant for tonight is the reputation that La Trobe has established in its innovation in teaching and learning. I particularly want to welcome our special guests, and we're really honoured to have you, Professor Mark Scott, with us this evening. The Chair and the Founder of Mornington Peninsula Foundation, Ian Hicks, and the Board of the Foundation that are able to be here tonight. The Mayor of the Mornington Peninsula Shire, Steve Holland, Councillor Steve Holland. Steve, really lovely to see you, and thank you for making the effort to be so supportive of what the Mornington Peninsula Foundation does, and other councillors that are here. And the Vice-Chancellor of La Trobe University, Professor John Dewar, who's also been a great friend to the Mornington Peninsula Foundation, and the Associate Dean Academic and Deputy Dean Education, Bernadette Walker-Gibbs, who's going to facilitate Q&A after Mark Scott's speech. The genesis of this oration comes from a significant amount of serendipity involving some key stakeholders. The first has been the work that the Foundation, led by our CEO Stephanie Exton, is doing in education in the Western Port area and in Rosebud. But perhaps before I launch into these initiatives, I should explain how the Mornington Peninsula Foundation even came about. Ian Hicks, who's with us in the front row here, is a successful businessman and philanthropist whose interests and passion have included the Mornington Peninsula over decades. His family have been supporting programs in education here for more than 10 years through the Family Foundation. In 2017, the opportunity arose for the creation of what's called a DGR1, Public Benevolent Institution, as a result of a change of the law. And Ian embraced that change with enthusiasm and created an organisation that has as its core commitment to reduce the levels significantly of social disadvantage on the Mornington Peninsula. Following the creation of the organisation and then the appointment of a board, a decision was taken that the most effective way to reduce disadvantage and intergenerational poverty is to enhance educational opportunities and capability. So the Foundation started work with Crib Point Primary School and Western Port Secondary in 2017 and gradually extended the reach to other primary schools in the Western Port area. That success led to similar programs being initiated by Rosebud Secondary and its feeder primary schools. Altogether, we're now working with 10 primary and secondary schools, and with work also being supported with adjoining preschools. The nature of the assistance initially grew organically in response to individual school needs, but the key development was with the No Limits program in 2018, and some of you would have been initial funders of that amazing program. And it focused on early years oral language and literacy and brought schools together in a strategic alliance. The support now is firmly rooted in the transition of schools to the implementation of the science of learning, and the results across a range of measures have really been outstanding. This transition is primarily about training and coaching teachers in the latest research concerning the brain, cognitive psychology, and how we learn in order to optimise engagement and learning for all the kids. Two of the Foundation's greatest supporters, Neville and Di Bertali, and unfortunately Neville's not able to be here, he's unwell, but his son Cameron is here and representing the family. Through their family foundation, they've been amazing supporters. They were the lead supporters of the No Limits program, and having seen the success that was achieved, they wanted to financially support an expansion in this state of teacher training in the science of learning. Neville, being the forensic individual that he is as a philanthropist, went to every Victorian university, every university in this state, and he interviewed them about whether they had a commitment to the science of learning. And the one that came out miles ahead of anyone was La Trobe University. They committed a very significant philanthropic gift to La Trobe to increase the number of teachers coming into the educational system with the skills of the science of learning. Although La Trobe knew of some of our work down here on the peninsula, it was this direct and philanthropic linkage that created the platform which has led to this lecture tonight. So, as I say, it's a real serendipitous situation that we have. The three organisations have come together to create what we think is an enduring legacy for the peninsula. Mark Scott is well known throughout Australia for a previous role that he held as the Managing Director of the ABC for 10 years up to 2016. He led that organisation's transformation to be a public broadcaster in the digital era. Having spent then some time as Secretary of the New South Wales Education Department, prior to then taking on the role as the Vice-Chancellor at Sydney University, he's well versed in the strengths and weaknesses of the education system. In July this year, the final report of the Teacher Education Expert Panel, Strong Beginnings, was released. That panel was chaired by Mark Scott, having been established by the Australian Government to improve initial teacher education. They wanted a focus on how to attract high-quality teachers into teacher education and how to best prepare them for a long, successful and rewarding career. The panel has confirmed now, more than ever, it's critical that we attract, train and retain brilliant teachers. However, teachers face more challenges than ever before, probably, with schools at the forefront of managing the impacts of the constant change that's shaping our society, not the least of which is social media and artificial intelligence. Mark Scott will speak tonight about some of the report's key findings and recommendations, including around access to high-quality, hands-on experience for all students wanting to be teachers, strengthening the accreditation and consistency in teacher program quality, and supporting mid-career employment pathways. And in particular, he'll focus on one of the report's key recommendations around the need for teacher education programs to use evidence-based practices, including a more scientific approach to learning, which aligns strongly with the principles of the La Trobe University School of Education. It also aligns with the work of the Foundation and what the Foundation is supporting in the retention of teachers, and the retraining of teachers in evidence-based practice in the 10 schools that we're working with on the Mornington Peninsula, which in fact is what inspired the Bertali Foundation to give their terrific philanthropic gift to La Trobe University. will you please join with me in welcoming Professor Mark Scott to give the inaugural MPF La Trobe Oration.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for that very kind welcome. It's wonderful to be able to join you in such a spectacular spot, to be able to talk a little bit about the challenges that we're facing in reforming initial teacher education, why it's important work, what we think needs to happen, and now the challenges of implementing significant reform. It's wonderful to see you again, Andrew, and Ian Hicks, and all those who are involved with the foundation here. Great to be here with my colleague, John Dewar. We sit in big meetings of Vice-Chancellors together. I've yet to find the collective noun for Vice-Chancellors, an ego of Vice-Chancellors, a dinosaur of Vice-Chancellors, whatever it is. John and I, we sit together, and I've learned a lot from him in my time as Vice-Chancellor. And to all others in the room, I know there are numbers of educators locally in the room as well. Bernie Walker-Gibbs from La Trobe. She'll be asking me questions later, so I'm going to be very nice to her tonight. But to all of you, thanks for coming out, and it's great to have the opportunity of being here. I want to also, of course, begin by acknowledging traditional owners of the land in which we meet. I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. I always like this week in the news. I'm an old journalist, and I always like this week. This is the week they give out the Nobel Prizes, and they do it with a spectacular style, and they keep the secrets well. You really don't know who those names are going to be, and every day there's another interesting story of people, often who we've never heard of, who all of a sudden have this spotlight and focus put on their lives in recognition of their life's work. I loved the images this morning of one of the scientists who was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics. There was a knock on, she was delivering a lecture, knock on the classroom door. She stepped out, took a phone call, got told she'd won the Nobel Prize, hung up, went back to complete the lecture. I thought that was dedicated. It's the kind of thing you would do, John, when the call eventually comes. But I was reading this afternoon, I thought I'd share it with you, just a terrific story of Albert Camus, who was the second youngest person to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. Camus' father died in World War I before Camus was one. His mother was illiterate. He lived with what is described in the biographies as a despotic grandmother, someone deprived of life's opportunities from a very early age, but remarkably becomes the second youngest person to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, and the award recognised his clear-sighted commentary and his illumination of the problem of the human conscience. And in the days after Camus won the prize, he wrote a letter to a teacher. And he said, "When I first heard the news of the Nobel Prize, my first thought after my mother was of you. Without you, without the affectionate hand you extended to the poor child that I was, without your teaching and example, none of this would have happened. I don't make too much of this sort of honour, but at least it gives me the opportunity to tell you what you have been and still are for me, and to assure you that your efforts, your work, and the generous heart you put into it still live in one of your little schoolboys who, despite the years, has never stopped being your grateful pupil. I embrace you with all my heart, Albert Camus." I've reflected on why this work is important, and Andrew referenced it, I think, in his opening remarks. Education is the most powerful tool that's been discovered to overcome disadvantage. This is the thing that really changed lives, and you change the life of an individual person. You're not just changing their lives, you're changing the lives of their family, you're changing the lives of the community that they are part of. It has generational impact. That's the power of education. But of course, failure to provide an outstanding education or educational opportunities for someone doesn't just deny them opportunities, that has intergenerational impact as well. And so if you believe in the power of education, then you've got to be committed to providing that opportunity to every young person, irrespective of their background, irrespective of their family, irrespective of the school they're going to. They deserve the transformational power that education can deliver. And we all know, and the research is clear, the most transformational thing a child can have is a great, engaged and highly skilled teacher. There's been a lot of debate and discussion as to where the investment needs to be in education. A lot of money spent on reducing class sizes, a lot of money invested in capital facilities, classrooms and other things to support education. But the most important thing is a great teacher equipped to teach effectively and well supported in the educational environment. And if you have great teachers well supported, that's where you unleash the transformational power of education. And so the importance of great teachers can't be overstated, but the challenges of the role shouldn't be underestimated as well. I think there's an argument that says it's never been more complex and more demanding to be a teacher. I think even back when I was teaching several decades ago, and I compare that time to now, teaching in many events operates in a school environment, and the school is often the last surviving piece of social infrastructure in a community. Often there were strong extended families that would wrap around a family in a home. Often there was engagement with the church or other kind of parts of social infrastructure. The school remains the one staple, secure, sure point of engagement for many families in many communities. And the pressures that bring to bear, educators tell me, very, very significant. I've had principals tell me it's not the children, it's the parents. And often an engaging and a counselling engagement with families and with parents, that's the responsibility that invariably falls to schools now. And as Andrew alluded to, I do believe that the last decade or more that's seen the arrival of ubiquitous technology in the hands of children, and particularly the impact of social media, has just made that environment that more challenging for teachers as well. Teaching is a job that delivers strong intrinsic rewards, but it is particularly challenging, and if teachers don't feel supported or equipped in the work they can do, the pressure of the importance of the job and the challenge they have in delivering on the role, I think, puts a real burden on teachers in a very, very significant way. And so really the work around initial teacher education and the terms of reference we were given by education ministers around the country for this review was not to solve all the challenges that exist in education. There are many. Initial teacher education is but one. But it's simply to recognise that if someone puts up their hand to be a teacher, we need and have an undertaking to them to equip them as best they can to successfully get through their degree and to land in a school as equipped and ready as they can be for the challenges that they're going to face, and to help them be resilient so that when the challenges invariably come, they feel up to that challenge and they grow through those challenges and they take deep root in the profession and they're likely to spend a long time in the profession. And so that's what our work has been all about. It's very interesting, I think, I sometimes was reflecting on this when we did the review, comparing how we treat initial teachers to how we treat those who've just graduated with a medical degree and become a doctor. Because when you finish a medical degree, you've still got a lot of learning to do. And often you're then taken up by the health system, you become an intern, you work very, very hard, but the structured learning continues all around and surrounds you as you continue to develop your skills in your career. And nobody thinks that someone graduating with a medical degree is fully finished and fully equipped. The learning continues. At times, if you're a specialist, for another decade it can take. So the recognition is the work isn't finished. Compare that to how you often treat a first-year teacher. Sometimes allocated to the toughest schools in the state, often allocated quite late in the school year when a lot of the timetabling has been done. So who gets the classes that nobody wants? Often teaching the subjects that nobody wants. Who gets maths with year 9 on a Friday afternoon? Invariably, it's the first-year teachers. We throw them in the deep end in a profound way. And unlike something like medicine that has the built-in structural support to continue on and support the learning, we toss them in the deep end and wonder why often this is so much of a challenge. They get the toughest gigs first up. And we should be committed to preparing confident, well-prepared and well-armed teachers with the skills they need to improve student learning from the very beginning. And I think that's important as well, because if you're a parent with a child in the class of a first-year teacher, you want to be confident and sure that the learning will continue effectively and well from the very start of what they should do. The other thing that I think puts this work into significant relief is the challenge that we now face around teacher shortages all across Australia. And this is the top priority of ministers around the country when I meet with them. There are a number of different factors that are taking place simultaneously here, which has created a perfect storm around teacher shortages. The first thing is that the baby boomers, some who've been in our schools for 30 or 40 years in teaching, in that significant population bubble that we had, many of them are now reaching a time where they want to retire. At the same time, we have increasing numbers coming into the school system, and school systems are reaping the legacy of the policy commitments of a decade or two ago, where the commitment was made that families should have one child for one mum, child for dad, and one for Australia. You know, the Costello baby boom bubble that's worked its way through the system too. So demographically, there are always going to be challenges about the supply of teachers diminishing as the demand for teachers increased. But I think COVID put another overlay on that as well. When I was running the New South Wales Department of Education, we did some work on what projections looked like. This was around 2018, what staffing projections looked like in 2020, 2025 and 2030. And in 2020, it was a continuation of a pattern we'd have often seen, that there are certain subjects that are hard to staff and certain geographies that are hard to staff, but that would continue. But it was going to get significantly worse by 2025, and by 2030 there were going to be widespread shortages across an array of subjects impacting all schools and all geographies. And what's really happened through COVID is that timetable has come dramatically forward, and that many teachers and many school principals were exhausted by the COVID process and felt that now is the time that they wanted to lift their heads and perhaps either bring forward retirement or try something else. So we have a very significant shortage of teachers that are in the headlines every day. But the other thing not widely seen is there's a real softness in demand for those who are starting teacher education programs. Every Vice-Chancellor I speak to around the country will identify the education faculty and the education degrees as the one where there is the softest uptake at the moment. Quite thin market. So at the time we need more and more, fewer and fewer are coming in the door. And so these all end up to significant challenges for us that we need to focus on. As I said, the challenges go way beyond initial teacher education, but initial teacher education is important. So that was the context by which we were asked to do this review. And we were asked to specifically look at what initial teacher students should be studying, how we can have some quality assurance about the work that they're doing, asked to provide some advice about prac work, and asked to provide advice around mid-career entry. So let me talk a little bit about what our findings are. The first one, and I think the key one, the most important one, is to really ask the question, through a 4-year degree in undergraduate education or a 2-year master's program, what's really important? What really needs to be mastered? What you find in the teaching standards is that there are dozens and dozens of things that teachers are meant to be coming to mastery of. But there is not a sense in those standards at the moment that these things are most important, these things are indispensable, these things we have to guarantee will be covered. And so working with the Australian Educational Research Organisation, scouring research from all around the world, we came up with some recommendations of what we fundamentally believe the core content to be. And these areas will be very familiar to those who work at La Trobe. Because I think, and I'll talk a bit about this later on, I think La Trobe's work in education has been truly pioneering and led the way significantly for what needs to happen around the country. Key content requirements for us included the brain and learning, for every teacher to understand how students learn, how the brain works, how we deal with things like cognitive load, short-term memory, working memory, how students get to a stage where they come to a mastery of a subject, so it's automatic for them, so they're not learning it over and over again and they can learn new skills as well. The science of learning has expanded a lot in the last 30 years. We come to a far better understanding of how people come to mastery of new skills. Apply that learning and make sure that every person doing an initial teacher education program understands how students learn. And then respond to that by making sure that those who are learning how to teach understand the pedagogies, the ways of teaching that will be most effective to helping students come to mastery. And that includes explicit instruction and clear understanding about how literacy mastery and numeracy mastery comes to bear, including a focus on phonics as part of the literacy program that comes to bear. Very importantly, classroom management. If you're spending all your time trying to manage a classroom environment, very little learning can take place. How do you foster an environment where students spend their time learning, focused on the task at hand, engaged in the learning, and confident that they are learning more and more over time? And then responsive teaching, recognising that our classrooms will be diverse. You'll have students from different backgrounds, different social contexts, being able to teach and engage in a way that's culturally and contextually appropriate and responsive to student needs. They were the four that we really called out: the brain and learning, effective pedagogies, classroom management, and responsive to the diversity that exists in. And we said, of all that is happening in initial teacher education programs, make sure that there is a focus and prioritisation on those things as well. Very interestingly to me, when the most recent NAPLAN results came out, as I was monitoring around the country, numbers of different newspapers and the ABC went and found schools that had done exceptionally well, and particularly found schools from low SES backgrounds, students from disadvantaged backgrounds or in disadvantaged schools that had done much better than you would have thought, much, much better than the demographic destiny may have anticipated. And these core requirements that we identified in our report were very much the hallmark of these schools. Effective pedagogy, explicit instruction, a focus on phonics, clear understanding of how the brain works, a consistency around classroom management. These are the tools that have been used to bring success. And if I think of my time running New South Wales Department of Education, we did a big review of what the evidence suggested on schools that were doing particularly well, much better than you may have anticipated, and these were the hallmarks you could see in these schools too. And so there was a strong confidence, I think, that this was absolutely in the right direction as far as the core content was concerned. But then we said it's one thing to have that as the core content. The next challenge is to ensure that it's actually being implemented. In many other courses around the country, in medicine and health and the like, there's a national accreditation program, but accreditation in education takes place at a state and territory level. We thought, should we implement national accreditation, but I think the feeling was that could take 10 years, and we didn't have 10 years to wait. So what we said we would do is we'd strengthen the oversight of ITE programs by having a national oversight board that would look at how state and territories were implementing a focus on core content and report nationally to education ministers on the transformation of ITE programs to make sure that these core areas of content were being covered. One of the things we identified is great inconsistency around the country around how prac works. And it's very interesting, if you look at the data around initial teacher education, a bad prac experience drives potential teachers out of the profession. Now, you have a bad prac experience where you feel there's no linkage between your experience at the school and what you're learning at the university, at times when there's no communication taking place between the university and the school where the prac is taking place, where the student does not feel supported and embraced by the school that arrives. That's the kind of thing that makes many young people in particular think, well, teaching may not be the profession for me. But great prac, conversely, works wonderfully well in locking people into the profession, in building confidence, in helping students see that there could be a pathway for them as well. So we have said that we believe that systems, particularly big education departments and the non-government sector as well, need to play a far clearer role in coordinating prac. That there should be some system-wide standards that are put into place and some system-wide involvement around the planning of prac to ensure that students really do have the ability to develop their skills in the classroom and be better equipped to more successfully transition into teaching and to stay in teaching. We also looked at mid-career entry, and I believe, even though the outlook for potential teachers is not terrific at the immediate undergraduate level, school leavers, I think there's far more potential at a mid-career level to be able to bring people into teaching, particularly if they've had a good decade or two in the workforce. Teaching does bring significant intrinsic rewards. Whilst the school term can be full and demanding, it does provide more flexibility around the time that schools aren't open. There are real appeals in teaching. But universities need to be far more flexible in how they offer those mid-career programs to bring people into the profession. There are many people, if you think of someone at the age of 40, they may have left their previous job, they may have taken a redundancy, but the prospect of them spending 2 years at university full-time, unpaid, at the age of 40, when they have a mortgage and possibly a young family, arguably the most expensive time of their life, that can be a real disincentive. So how can we arrange and structure the way a graduate entry program might look like to perhaps concentrate in a block the time that's spent at university, spend more time in and around a school environment, and actually pay them while they're working in a school as well to basically transition them into the workplace. We saw interesting schemes all around the country that were experimenting in this way, and we strongly endorse that activity. We do feel that the reforms that we've outlined could provide a critical advantage in helping solve some of the workforce challenges that we face. Around the country, initial teacher education programs often has the highest dropout rates of any courses that are offered by higher education providers. And so part of our question has been, well, why is that dropout rate high? There'll be some who immediately don't take to it. In their first year of study, if they just feel it's not for them, that might be okay. The thing, though, I think we've got to realise is the more and more someone gets into a degree, often clocking up HECS debt at the same time, the more we should think about what are we doing wrong and that we cannot hold them in the profession well. And that's where I think focusing on the things that matter most, focusing on the prac experience are very, very important. But if in fact we could keep 1%, if we can improve the retention rate in initial teacher education programs by 1%, that's 300 additional teachers in the country. If we could increase it by 10% across the country, that's 3,000 additional teachers coming into the system each year. And then once we've got them in, we've got to hold them. And again, a 10% reduction in the resignation rate of those at the beginning part of their career would release another 1,000 teachers into the system every year. And I think it's these issues that have really galvanised education ministers around the country to the reforms. They know that in a sense we are being wasteful with students who are currently studying initial teacher education if so many of them are dropping out. And we know if they feel ill-equipped for the challenge they're going to face when they land at school because they haven't focused on the things that matter most, then they are unlikely to speak to others confidently about the prospect of becoming a teacher. So we've had good support from education ministers around the reforms, but there are some significant challenges that still lie ahead, and I want to talk about them in the balance of my time before I prepare for my cross-examination. One of the things we discovered looking into it was the IT area is really very complex because there's no single owner of initial teacher education. The federal government funds the universities. The departments of education, the non-government schools recruit the graduates. It's heads of school and deans who decide what's really going to be taught in the programs, and the accreditation is provided by independent accrediting agencies in different states and territories. So who is responsible? Everyone is responsible, or nobody is responsible. Who can bring about change? Well, everyone can bring about change, or no one can bring about change. It's a tough area of reform, and I had Bill Loudon on my committee, former Deputy Vice-Chancellor in Western Australia and a great educational academic, and Bill talked about decades of reviews of higher education, which have very little of initial teacher education, decades of reviews that have very little to show for them because the implementation is so complex. And so part of my challenge now is to encourage education ministers in particular to remain fairly focused on the importance of the reform at a state and territory level and also a national level as well. I do think the implementation of the kinds of reforms we are suggesting here around core content will be challenging for many higher education providers because that's not where they've focused so much to date. It will be easiest for a university like La Trobe that clearly has followed the evidence and gone down this path in recent years to great support and endorsement for the work that takes place at La Trobe around initial teacher education, and very important outreach to current teachers who feel that they haven't been given these skills and this area of focus in their preparation, and so therefore have beaten a path to La Trobe's door for professional development as their careers are underway. I think it is almost inevitable that some accrediting agencies in states and territories will say, look, there's no need to change any of this. We've got all of this covered now. We can do it without significant change. I think that would be a problem. I also think that there'll be universities who say, look, our students are fine. And again, I think that's where a commitment around implementing this kind of reform is very important. We should be collectively dissatisfied at the preparation we are giving for those people who put up their hands to be teachers. That too many of them drop out and too many of them land at in schools without the skill base and the resilience that's necessary to really take root in the profession. We need to do better by them and we need to do better by our schools. And accreditation will be the main lever to ensure that the core content is delivered well, and we look forward to a strong accreditation process that takes place. There's a big review that's taking place now of school resourcing. It's almost viewed as the third Gonski review, and the commitment that I think many want to see that government schools in particular are funded to the full level recommended in the Gonski review a decade ago. I think one of the interesting questions that will emerge is if there is to be more money in education, where is that money best spent? What is the real priority for investment in education? And one of the things I've argued to that review panel on school resourcing, and I've talked about with the Minister, is that I think investment in this area, in strong, high-quality prac for trainee teachers, and then strong mentoring and coaching for initial teachers who are starting in their professional career as teachers, that would be a tremendous investment to make. And if there additional money was to be spent, to really think of this as a starting teacher, the 3 years that perhaps that they in lead up to them starting, and then their first 3 years in the workplace, we really do need a strong investment in all of that as well. So as I said, I believe we owe these reforms to those who put up their hand to be teachers. We need to be committed to their success. We need to be committed to an evidence-based approach to what is being taught. We need to strongly support them in their learning and have continued support to wrap around them so they are ready to teach and they are resilient to teach. And that is an investment that will change lives of students in our schools today, and an investment that will have a generational impact. So I might pause there and Bernie see where the conversation takes us.
Walker Gibbs. I'm a proud member of the School of Education at La Trobe, and it's so wonderful to have everyone here to hear Professor Scott and all the work that you've done, not just for this report, but in terms of education more broadly. I have a feeling for the teachers in the room that Professor Scott may have looked over my shoulder and seen some of my questions, because I think he's addressed some of the issues. But I'm just gonna probe a little. Ready? I'm not a journalist, so I don't know the rules. So
Very dangerous. Yeah.
so I do know that you talk about this as being a time and of great importance for us, and that it is imperative that we look at this now. There is no more time. We're in a state of complexity and challenges for all teachers, for all students, for all, higher education is also in a state of flux and change. So given that, as you mentioned, we've had, even in the last 40 years, lots and lots of reviews and recommendations, how confident are you that this one will actually progress?
Yeah. Thanks. August last year, I was called to a meeting of state and territory education ministers, heads of departments, non-government schools, unions, all at Parliament House to discuss the teacher workforce challenge that the nation was facing. And in different roles, some as a journalist, some working for politicians, over the last 30 years, I've been to a number of these meetings of education ministers in particular. This one was particularly memorable because I think around the country, every minister and every department head, everyone running a system, was deeply gripped by what they see as the endemic challenge of teacher shortages that we face now, and a recognition that there is no magic wand for that. And even if you could instantly create them, it takes years to make a good teacher. So if you have a shortage now, you have relatively few in the pipeline, you know that this is a challenge that's going to profoundly shape your time as a minister or a departmental secretary. This is the grim reality that you have to face and to deal with. And so I think in the past, there have been lots of reviews of initial teacher education. There have been ideological wars on how you teach children how to read. There's been all these debates that have gone round and round and round. I think now what we've got is two things happening simultaneously. One is the focus that we cannot be wasteful around teacher numbers. We need to make sure that we graduate every student that we can, and we need to make sure we create a great opportunity for every graduating teacher in a school, so we keep as many as we can. So the teacher workforce challenge, I think, asks the question about, are we doing all we can to create ready and resilient teachers? The other thing I think is evident is, and I alluded to it in the work we've done at New South Wales, I think the challenge around the nation's trajectory in PISA, the nation's trajectory as far as NAPLAN outcomes are concerned, has led there to be a real focus around what does the evidence suggest we should be doing? What does the evidence say is most likely to bring a strong learning outcome for most students in most settings? And to a degree, again, I think it's an area where you look at medicine. Medicine is has a desperate focus for what the research shows, where improved outcomes come, and there is an embracing of that research to improve the medical outcomes of patients. Whereas in education, I think there hasn't been that same history of engagement around research, and people have been far more inclined to tolerate a view that says, well, I don't really care what that evidence says. I've always done it this way, and this has been fine for me and fine for my students. I think often we've been deceived as well. Sorry, very long answer. We've often been deceived as well. There are some students, I think this is where we got, we fell a bit off the rails on the reading stuff. There are some kids who just brilliantly teach themselves how to read. How wonderful. But not every child does. So are we equipped? And the price of not learning how to read, you pay for that all the way through school, you pay that all the way through life. If you don't have good literacy skills, you are punished in every subject at school. And your career trajectory is terrible. So we have such a responsibility to ensure that every student learns how to read. So what does the research show that we should be doing to ensure that there are not gaps in our net and that every student is coming through? So I do think the combination of more and more evidence coming to bear as to where the focus should be on the one hand, and a stronger commitment to make sure that we are creating ready and resilient teachers on the other hand has galvanised an attention and focus around this. I don't underestimate the implementation challenge, and I don't underestimate that for some they just may prefer that we not have to go through all of this. But there is a lot at stake, and I hope the ministers in particular are up for the challenge of taking on meaningful reform in this area.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, people need to not underestimate the significance of what you're talking about there, and the fact that Ministers of Education are incredibly supportive of this initiative. But so this question's kind of in two parts. One's about accountability, and one is about the significance and importance of initial teacher education within this space as well. So in terms of accountability, one of the findings from your report is actually around the national board, the notion of a national board. And I think a lot of people are really curious about what does accountability look like in terms of that board. So you've kind of alluded to it a bit, but how do you actually see that being enacted, and what does it look and feel like for you?
Yeah, what we'd really like the board to do is a number of different things. Look at how accreditation is working at different states and territories. Make sure there is some consistency in approach, and make sure that all accrediting agencies are focusing around the core content that is now to be central for initial teacher education programs. So make sure that there is a consistency in approach. To report more extensively on the diversity that exists within initial teacher education programs, to identify areas of best practice where the rest of the system can learn. There were some people who said, well, will you rank all the initial teacher education programs? Well, it's a pretty simplistic approach in many ways. But what you want to do is to find out which are the university faculties and schools that are doing a terrific job. Why does that school have a much lower dropout rate? Why does that school have a much lower dropout rate for first year students? How do they select those students and really kind of get them well seated in? Which schools are doing really good at identifying Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students and bringing them through an initial teacher education program and successfully seeing them move into schools? That's the kind of data we want to report on. One of the things we're pushing them to get more data on through the Australian teaching workforce data is 5 and 10 year trajectories after graduation. I'm really interested in this. With the risk of upsetting some of my colleagues who run universities with lots of sandstone, of which I am one, I think it's kind of interesting. One of the things I want to see the long-term trajectory of, a university like Sydney or Melbourne attracts very bright and very capable students. High ATARs, they get into programs, they get high ATARs. Because they've been successful at school, they're likely to be successful at university as well. They graduate and they get great jobs. And so it's an easy view to say there's nothing to see here with these schools. I think the interesting question that was raised for our panel was, is that a tribute to the school, or is that a tribute to the cohort that has entered the program? So one of the very interesting questions I would have is, how many of those students who've gone through those programs are still teaching 3, 5, 10 years later? Because I think that's a hallmark of a great program too. Not just that you graduate someone and they start, but they start in a way that their careers continue to develop in a successful way. So this oversight board, I think, will identify best practice, report on diversity across the system. We've recommended there be some grant schemes that are awarded to reward excellence and help excellent practice disseminate more broadly beyond the university where they're operating from, and to help with transition, and to provide advice to ministers as to whether in fact the core content that we've identified now is changing as the research changes, and whether we need to modify that over time too. So a meaningful board, I think.
So I'm going to flip my questions now, and because I think you're kind of picking up on some other significant conversations that are happening in higher education. So you talk about the significance of initial teacher education, but initial teacher education sits within higher education. And we have the Universities Accord interim report. So what do you see as some of the synergies between your report and the University Accord that, I know, I'm sorry, John, I have to ask it. He didn't ask me to ask it, by the way. So in terms of that, because, I mean, I have my own opinions on some of this work because my research is in rural and regional research. So I'm one of the greatest prides of working in La Trobe is all our regional campuses and what we do and how significant they are. So where do you see higher education helping support ITE, supporting the Universities Accord? So where are the connections for you?
Well, there are some that are quite practical and there are some that are broad. One of the practical ones that I know Mary O'Kane is looking at is the challenge of prac and the financial cost of prac. One of the things we know is that if you have gone and done a prac in a regional school or remote school and you spend a bit of time there, you're that much more likely to consider the opportunity of going up and taking a permanent slot there. But if you've never been there, you're unlikely to do that. So there are real benefits in the system of getting as many students out as possible to have as broad an experience as possible. But more and more of our students are working to support themselves through their degrees. And if you're mid-career, you often are juggling it with other commitments as well. So how do you make it financially possible that someone can do that and provide, in a sense, salary supplementation or some level of support to do that? That's something that Mary is looking at for education, also something to look at nursing and physiotherapy and a range of other courses that look for that as well. I think, certainly in my time in the Department of Education, students from regional areas are that much more likely to teach in regional areas. So how do you make sure that there are the programs that are on offer in areas of great demand rather than just pulling everyone to the big metropolitan areas in order to do it? I think that's another area that you look at as well. I think the broader question, and this is the high-level question about the review, that I think the review is still largely silent on. They talk about a massive increase in the requirement of people for university degrees, a 50% increase over the next couple of decades. Already, Australian universities are amongst the biggest universities in the world. You know, when I meet Vice-Chancellors of Ivy League universities in America or the Russell Group in the UK, there's universities that are ranked similarly to the University of Melbourne and the University of Sydney. They are astonished to find out we have 75,000 students. And so where the report is largely silent, they say more will need degrees, but they don't actually say, well, where are those students going to go? One of the interesting questions, I think, is that should part of our repertoire be the return of higher education institutions, particularly targeted around something like teaching? Is it the return of the Teachers' College as a supplement? A higher education facility that is particularly specialised and particularly focused on preparing teachers. Now, that has not been the model since the Dawkins era of the late 80s. But if, in fact, you have to get many, many more through, more specialist targeted institutions going to be one of the ways that we look at that too. I think these are all unknown questions.
But just further to that, you talk about more, and we know, and it's quite scary when you think about 1% and 2% and 10% making such a significant difference. And we're really proud in the School of Education at La Trobe that our retention rates are actually pretty high, so we do fairly well. But at the same time, and this is also linked to the Universities Accord, it's not just about more, it's about more First Nations, more low SES, more, and are disproportionately represented in rural communities. And I know our own Vice-Chancellor often talks about, to principals and community, the each kilometre you get away from the CBD, the less likely that you're going to have good outcomes in terms of education. And you also alluded to that in your speech. So how do we do the more at the same time as the more diverse and more inclusive?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a profound question. It's one of the reasons why that Oversight Board will report on diversity in universities that are doing particularly well on that. I also think, again, it might be a bit high level, but I mean, there are two great distorting effects, I think, in Australian higher education. And one is that the cost of research is not fully funded. Which has given rise to a very significant number of international students who are a great net plus for Australian higher education, but we're dependent on them to fund research. But the other great challenge is the full cost of teaching is not covered. It's very, very interesting. You know, under a Gonski model, I'm sorry, I only can give you the New South Wales examples that I use, but under the Gonski funding model, a student in Moree, isolated part of the state, attracts far more dollars from the government purse than a student in Mossman, one of the most advantaged suburbs in Sydney, because it's recognised it costs more to teach them. That child is significantly educationally disadvantaged. They will need more resources invested in them. That's what the Gonski model is all about. Somehow, miraculously, we think when they turn 18 and turn up on the doorstep of the university, that all that disadvantage is washed out, and that a student is a student is a student, irrespective of their background, irrespective of where they live, irrespective of what they're studying. So, you know, I'm speaking generally, but arguably a student studying arts from Moree attracts the same money as a student studying arts from Mossman. That makes no sense. And I think there are many Vice-Chancellors in the country who are aggrieved around the fact that the full cost of teaching is not recognised, and there are others who are aggrieved the full cost of research is not recognised. And if the Accord came up with a view that says over the next decade we're marching in that direction, full cost of teaching funded, full cost of research funded, then higher education over the next decade gets far healthier, even though that would be a significant call on the public purse.
I'm going to preface this last question, and then I open it up to you, audience members, with just acknowledging Professor Joanna Barbusis, who is actually our Dean in the School of Education, and the work that she has done, and I know that you're very familiar with her work, and she's an apology today because she's in Iceland. But before,
what kind of excuse is that?
I know,
Iceland?
But prior to that, she's actually she spent over, I think, about 3 weeks in the UK learning and thinking, and we're getting lots of texts and a lot of messages back, and we know that when she gets back on Monday, we've got a lot more work to do. So, but I just want to acknowledge that the work that we do in the School of Education is really a result of her vision, and so we welcome the TEEP report, and we're so ready for it. And but at the same time, when we think about the work that we're doing, context matters. It's all about context for us. And as you know, one of the main objectives of this oration today is actually to focus on local and national significance, in this case, teacher education. So how do you see programs such as the Mornington Foundation, you know, and Nexus, our employment-based program, and we have Miriam Tanti here today, who's our Associate Dean Partnerships, but also the Director of the Nexus program, but also the amazing work by the Bertali Foundation that we've been privileged to be a recipient of. How do you see that work making a significant difference or playing a significant part with real impact in these communities, particularly somewhere like the Mornington Peninsula?
So can I begin by also just, you know, recognising, I think the great contribution Joanna made to the thinking of the review panel. I met with her a couple of times. Key people who were doing the drafting and thinking were engaged. And I thought it was very interesting when the report came out. You know, a lot of journalistic roads led to La Trobe, and there was quite a lot of interest in what had been happening at La Trobe because of, I think, the parallels between our findings on what all universities should be doing and what had been taking place at La Trobe, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the thirst for teachers currently in schools to get more mastery of this and the success of La Trobe programs around that. You know, the power of education, though, is local. And, you know, I think a strong local focus where the schools feel the weight of the support of the community, this is what I think is really powerful and what is happening here. Many principals I speak to and teachers feel increasingly criticised through the media, held to blame for the challenges that the school system have, feel that there's too much bureaucracy that comes at them from head office but not as much support. And it's interesting around school funding models. I've had many school principals say to me, a little less cash, a little more support would have been how they would have balanced it over time. So I think when you come here and you see generous financial support emerging from the community leaders actively engaged, practical hands-on tools and support coming to bear in a range of local schools, and recognising there is a collective responsibility for the children in this area to give them every opportunity so that they can use education as a tool whereby they can flourish. I think that is a particularly important initiative. The other thing that I see philanthropy being very important in doing is providing risk capital so that we can try things that we wouldn't normally be able to try. Big bureaucracies are very risk averse by definition. You never, you don't want to be, don't tell a minister you want to try something that's a bit risky. That's not going to get much traction. But then we know in innovation, we know through all the theory and practice of innovation that failure is the key to learning. And then it's only when you try things and fail well and understand why things didn't work, when that makes the next thing you're likely to try that much more likely to be successful. So if it's a totally risk-averse environment where we're unwilling to try anything, then we won't actually get much further than we are today. And that old saying, always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Right. So one of the things that I've seen non-profits be really good at is allow local schools and parts of the department, divisions of the department or others, or systemic schools to be able to say, look, there's some money on the table here for us to try something different and new. And it's almost the seed money that comes in from philanthropy allows there to be more attempts at innovation. And once you get the innovation and some evidence that it is working, you're that much more likely to get engagement to scale that. Philanthropists will not be in a position, and often will not want to be in a position where they massively want to scale it, but they do want to be engaged in helping us get to the point where the argument is built around scaling and significant reform. So schools not feeling isolated, additional resources coming into schools, opportunity to try things innovative and new, and something that's very targeted around the particular needs of a particular community and informed by practice here. They're all the positive things that I can see happening here.
What I find really interesting when you're talking about this is that you're talking about evidence-based practice, evidence-based learning, but at the same time you're talking about risk. And I think that's really refreshing. And one of the things I used to always think that, the greatest shames of any academic conference I go to is people always talk about the success of their work, the experiments that went right, the outcomes that were good. But what we probably need, I think, is a conference or something around failure. Yeah. But then if everyone came, it would be successful. So I don't know. But, that conversation around risk, I think, is really interesting here. And how do we encourage initial teacher educators or in the heads of department to take risks when they're so regulated?
Yeah.
So how do we do that? And you've got 2 minutes.
Yes, that's probably 2 minutes more than I need, because there's not an easy answer to that. No. But I do think it is for those in higher education. I just think in higher education of all places, we should be rewarding innovation and experimentation. We should be robust in reporting around our success and failures. We should be generous in sharing our failures as well as our successes. And we have a commitment not just to our research, but to the greater knowledge for the greater good. And so let's try things, let's talk about them, let's share our successes, let's share our insights from our failures. We should make that part of our culture. It's always been the culture of higher education. And in an area as important as this, more important than ever, that's our focus.
Thank you, Professor Scott. I'm going to hand over to the audience now. If I have time for about 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah.
No. I was gesturing to the microphone.
Just a couple of brief comments. My name's Frank Oberclade. I'm an academic paediatrician. A couple of comments. One is you alluded a lot to the medical profession as a potential model, although be careful, you're comparing apples and oranges, but it is much more tightly regulated. You cannot become a consultant physician in Australia without a rural or remote term. So that's one way they've addressed that. And you're quite right that those that do a term in country Victoria, country Australia, are much more likely to go there and practice. The second is an anecdote, if you'll just indulge me a little bit. A number of years ago, I was invited to become a member of an expert panel for the World Health Organization in Geneva to discuss the question, what is a good parent? How do you know what good parenting is? So some very smart people around the country from all over the world, and we spent 4 days debating this. And we landed on a good parent is a responsive parent. And that's why I really resonated with one of your forearms is a responsive teacher. So a responsive parent is one who realises the child is trying to signal, first of all, notices the child is not in a stable equilibrium, notices that he or she is trying to do something, interprets that with a repertoire of responses. So if a baby's crying, it might be wet, try to change the nappy, it might be hungry, give it a feed, might need to be held, etc. And it seems that's a really good metaphor for teaching as well, because if a child isn't enthusiastic in the classroom about learning, the teacher notices that usually, but then often doesn't have that repertoire of responses, blames it on ADHD or blames it on behaviour or disruptive. And so they need to have a repertoire of responses. Now, against that, we do a lot of work in schools over a long period of time. Many teachers do have that repertoire, but they don't access it because they don't have the affirmation or the support or the space to think that through.
Yeah.
But in the work we do with schools, if you give teachers the time and the support and empower them to come up with the solutions, they know the solutions far better than a visiting psychologist or OT or a paediatrician.
And I think the thing I'd add there is, time and support. And that's why I think, and again, if you think of the medical practice, I know at the University of Sydney, we have the best specialists working with our students, and the whole structure of the medical program is to learn from the best. I think often you get into schools, your best teachers are so busy and so overwhelmed, and a prioritisation has not been given to free up their time to work in a coaching and mentoring way with the new teachers who come. And that's why I think that's an important investment. And if you were to use some of the money coming into the system to free up people's time so they could really invest in the development of those who are new, I think that just pays handsome results over time.
Unfortunately, we have time for one more question. Oh, over here. Thank you. Back right. My right.
Hi, I'm Tina Coombe. I'm the principal of Crib Point Primary School and have the great privilege of working with this amazing group of people and also the Mornington Peninsula Foundation. I just wanted to say thank you for the work that's been done on this report. I've listened this afternoon as a school principal, but also as a mum of a daughter who finishes her teaching degree in 2 sleeps. Wow. As she puts it. And to watch the journey that she's gone on, it's really resonated about the recommendations that have been made. And can I say from a very personal experience, the one about training teachers who are on extensive teaching rounds and the financial cost to them with that, having seen that from a very personal experience, a very stressed young person who's trying to work out how to give their best and all to their teaching practicum, but at the same time trying to live at the same time. So I just wanted to thank you for the incredible work and the recommendations that have been made, one as a school principal, but also as a mum, of a hoping to be very new teacher very soon.
Well, please pass on the best wishes of this group to the new teacher, 2 sleeps away. And we trust it's a long and happy and enduring career. And I'll just conclude by this, by saying that I think great teachers know this. There's always, no teacher ever went into it for the money. They went into it because they thought they could really make a difference. And teachers who know they are making a difference and feel liberated and supported to make a difference know that impact. And if I conclude, where I started with Camus, won the Nobel Prize, what he wanted to do, thank his mother, thank the teacher that changed his life. So I think teachers understand this. We just need to make sure there are new generations coming into the profession who are equipped to make that contribution as well and do all we can to make them as ready and resilient as they can be.
That's a great note to leave it on. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much more I want to talk to you about, but that's actually not my job anymore. So I get to hand over to the amazing Stephanie, and Stephanie, she'll take it from here.
Thanks so much, Bernie. And wow, this has just been fantastic. It's so good to be here, to have you all here. I feel like this is a really fabulous group of people. Honestly, Mark, to hear all those, it's wonderful. Like, it's so empowering, and I'm so glad you said that about failure, because we have at times, but we've learnt so much from that failure. We didn't get to this point straight away, not by any means, and it's only because of our risk-taking founder and funder and chair of our foundation that we have that ability. It goes down the line all the way. And it's really interesting because, you know, we're a place-based philanthropic organisation. We work very much at the grassroots. I spend most of my time talking to teachers, to principals, to our community support organisations, as well as to our beautiful and wonderful donors. But, you know, it's kind of smallish, so to hear this big picture, it's really empowering and fantastic and really reinforcing. So thank you so much. We really, really value your contribution. What an amazing start to this partnership and this Oration, to have you firstly agree. We were very excited. Then to get here on time after all the plane delays and sitting on the tarmac. It's perfect timing. Thank you very much. And we have a small gift which we would love to give to you now. Mark, thank you. Bernie, they were fabulous questions, and again just opened up the discussion so beautifully for us all here. We really appreciate that, and also would like to recognise the great work that your Dean, Joanna, has done in this absolutely groundbreaking work. So in her absence, we thank her. Please pass that on from us. And we have a small gift for you as well. No. Professor John Dewar, we wouldn't be doing this without your wonderful engagement and leadership. We really value that enormously. As Andrew said, you know, it's been a lot of factors have just come together serendipitously, but I think essentially there's this amazing shared core values. We actually just want things to be better for our kids. That's essentially why we're all here. When you have that shared value, things happen not seamlessly, but very beautifully, and that's what's happened here. So we're enormously grateful to you for your leadership in this work. Our donors, thank you. None of it would happen without you. I can't name everybody because every single one is so important, no matter what amount. You know, we really value all of our donors. Andrew and our board, as Deputy Chair, thank you for your work in bringing this together. All but one of our directors are here tonight. How exciting. It's really great to have you all here. You provide this amazing guidance and support for me personally and for our small but growing team. Thank you to our team, Sarah and Nikki, who are here tonight, and to the La Trobe team behind the scenes, pulling all of this together. And of course, our principals and teachers, who I love, and who do fantastic work every day. You are the ones that do the work that we talk about. And honestly, it's so inspiring to be part of what you do. I love our steering committee meetings. You're all so funny. Like, it's really enormously great, rewarding to be part of it. Thank you all so much. And you do take risks. I know you do. And you think, God, I'm going to lose my job over this. No. So thank you for the courage that you show. And it's absolutely wonderful to have Angela and Simon with us tonight from very senior levels in the department. Our teachers and principals were thrilled that you were both able to come. So thank you everyone for coming. I just don't want to quite finish without also saying that this work is, you know, so exciting. It's about the future. It's about all of our children. But tonight, a lot of people are homeless, and tonight a lot of people are experiencing things that were the indicators that brought us all to this point. I really want to recognise that we also support Really unsung heroes in our community, Jeremy and Georgia from the community support centres and your staff. Because this isn't going to be solved overnight, this is a long-term commitment we have. That's why we're a place-based foundation, that's why we're not going anywhere, that's why we're sticking it out. We want to do that risk-taking funding, we want to get that evidence, we want to then share it with policymakers. That takes time, and in the meantime, things are not great, and we really value your support. Thank you. So thank you all for coming to this inaugural oration. Really look forward to seeing you next year. And thank you, Ian, again for making this all happen.
I'd like to just say something.
Please.
I must say, Mark, that is the most beautifully presented oration from the Mornington Peninsula Foundation, Trobe University, that we've ever had. And I'm fascinated to hear you talk about risk-taking because, as Stephanie said, we took a lot of risks in the early days and we didn't always get it right. We've had quite a few failures. And there's an old saying that I thought Mark was going to say, and that is it's far, far better to have tried and failed than never to have tried at all. And the sort of corollary to that is that even though I'm from Melbourne, I actually barrack for the Sydney Swans. And in the last 10 years, we've played in 4 grand finals, but we've only won 1 of them, and we've lost 3. But I can tell you it's far, far better to have played and lost than never to have played in the grand final at all. Thanks very much.
See you all next year.